Das Jahr 2024 neigt sich dem Ende zu. Zeit für einen Blick zurück. Der syrische Staat ist gefallen. Der Republikaner Donald Trump hat die US-Wahl gewonnen. Die Bundesregierung ist zerbrochen. Die BRICS haben sich konsolidiert. Indien und China haben ihren Grenzkonflikt beendet. Wo steht die Welt heute? Was ist anders im großen geopolitischen Spiel als noch am 1. Januar dieses Jahres?
Well, I think we can safely say that the assurance of a decisive Russian victory in Ukraine is one of the outcomes of 2024. I would be surprised if the conflict survives 2025. I think the election of Donald Trump is a game-changing moment globally. It doesn't mean positive outcomes are assured, but it means that business as usual will never be business as usual again. And I think this is especially true for NATO and the European Union. I think 2025 will be a year of catastrophe for Europe in terms of the framework that it had so painstakingly constructed over the course of the past several decades. That framework is corroded, corrupt, collapsing, and Europe will be left trying to figure out what to do. And I think Germany is the barometer of this, watching the German elections coming up, seeing what Germany will do to suppress populist movements that the German mainstream establishment fear. Are they going to be successful in doing this? Will the German people allow this? What the consequences of this will be? The same holds true in France. I don't know if Macron survives the year, and what will happen in France if there is a Macron resignation. Nobody knows. Great Britain is likewise in turmoil and facing yet another potential collapse of another prime ministership. Europe is a sickened continent, populated by nations that have governments that don't reflect the legitimate interests of the people they're supposed to govern. In contrast, you compare Russia, which is governed by a government that the people very much want, who governs over a nation that people believe in. I don't see the same belief systems in Europe regarding the European Union or even the various nations that you see in Russia. So I think we're going to be seeing a year where Russia will emerge dominant, not because they're seeking military occupation of Europe, but the fact is that Europe is collapsing, Russia's on the ascendancy, and I think 2025 will solidify this. The Middle East is in absolute turmoil right now. The entire, what was an existential struggle between Israel and what we were calling the axis of resistance, Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, backed up by Syria, has now turned into a reemergence of the Ottoman Empire, as Erdogan is literally reversing history and trying to absorb into the Turkish orbit lands that he claims were unjustly taken from Turkey back at the end of World War I. And we're looking at the entire region going through shock therapy. Israel was thought to be on its back feet. The Netanyahu government was thought to be on the verge of collapse. The prospect of a Palestinian state is thought to be able to be physically manifested. And now all of this is gone. Not only is Netanyahu on his feet, Israel is victorious, and we're now looking at the reality of a greater Israel as Israel purges the Palestinian state, or what could have been a Palestinian state from its soil in Gaza and the West Bank, expands its borders in Lebanon and Syria. And with the Trump administration coming in, we'll find no pushback from the United States. So Iran is weakened. Iran has its own political problems now that they have to deal with. Hezbollah has been redefined. Instead of being the sword against the Israeli throat held by the Iranian hand, it is now an institution that is isolated and under pressure from without and within Lebanon to redefine itself in a manner that makes it non-threatening to Israel. This is a fundamental change in the reality of the Middle East. Nations like Saudi Arabia, that just a few months ago said that they could never consider the normalization of relations with Israel until there was a free and independent Palestine whose capital was in Jerusalem, are now going to forget they ever said this and start to move towards normalization with Israel, which sets out the potential of we in 2024 we saw a rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia negotiated by the Chinese, and now we see the prospect of that rapprochement being nullified by this expansionist Israel that seeks the existential defeat of Iran. You have Donald Trump talking about the potential of military action against Iran in 2025. So the Middle East is in absolute turmoil. It always has been in turmoil, but the recipe is different in 2025, different ingredients and different preparation methods. But the end result is tragedy for all the people who reside in that troubled land. China is going to be an interesting focus in 2025 as Donald Trump seeks to woo Xi Jinping away from Russia. So it'll be an interesting, this is one thing that people have always talked about, how dedicated China was to BRICS multilateralism versus the possibility of dividing the world amongst them with the United States. And so now that concept will be put to the test because Donald Trump clearly believes that he can lure China away from multilateralism and get China to engage in the classic game of let's divide the world's spoils amongst us. I think that's doomed to fail, but then again, I'm not Chinese, so I don't get to make decisions for them. But 2025 will be it's a year in transition. It was always going to be a year in transition, but if you looked at the beginning of 2024 and the trajectories we're headed on, it looked as though the United States and its rules-based international order was, being shouldered out by the multipolarity of China, Russia, India, et cetera. And I think 2025 is going to see a resurgence of the United States on the global stage. Maybe not as the head of the rules-based international order, because that was contingent upon America buying into establishments like the European Union and NATO, but more as imperial America, seeking to reassert itself in a unilateral fashion. So it's going to be a year of transition, trauma, tragedy. I don't think anything good's going to come out of 2025.
Wenn wir nun auf das kommende Jahr 2025 schauen, dann wird es schon am 20. Januar einen Höhepunkt erleben und möglicherweise auch einen Wendepunkt in der Geopolitik. Mit dem Amtsantritt von Donald Trump könnten die USA in ihrer Außenpolitik eine Kehrtwende vollziehen. Nach dem vom französischen Präsidenten Emmanuel Macron so groß inszenierten Treffen zwischen Trump und Zelensky betonte der designierte US-Präsident im Interview mit NBC, er werde die Ukraine-Unterstützung deutlich reduzieren. Erwartest du, dass sich die USA unter Trump von der Ukraine distanzieren werden? Sind damit die Pläne eines NATO-Beitritts der Ukraine vom Tisch? Werden die USA aufhören, die strategische Niederlage Russlands als Ziel zu setzen?
Ukraine was never going to be a member of NATO, so I don't know why we continue to pretend that it was. Just because failed French presidents articulate such notions doesn't mean that it comes even remotely close to being realistic. Ukraine will never be a member of NATO. The question now is, what will be Ukraine? I would imagine that the Russians are putting Donald Trump on notice that the sooner this conflict comes to an end, the better the outcome will be for post-Zelensky Ukraine. But that Russia's in no mood to brook any nonsense from the United States or anybody about a ceasefire, about a negotiated settlement, equity. There is no equity. Ukraine is a defeated enterprise, a defeated nation, and that is the reality. And I think Trump is recognizing this. Trump wants to avoid the embarrassment of being seen as backing down to Russian demands. So the easiest way to create a potential off-ramp is to put pressure on Ukraine to create conditions that will be acceptable to Russia. And I don't mean that it means to get Ukraine to do things, but for instance, by cutting the prospects of continued economic and financial assistance by the United States, the Ukrainians themselves will see the writing on the wall and seek to bring an end to this conflict. Zelensky is rapidly disappearing as a viable leader of Ukraine, and I think that whatever deal is eventually agreed to by the Ukrainian government with Russia won't involve Zelensky. I don't think he's long for this world as president of Ukraine. I also believe that Donald Trump is moving in a direction that will end the decades-long American goal of seeking the strategic defeat of Russia. That Trump will be looking for a way to normalize relations, to bring an end to this mad rush towards war. There's no guaranteed outcomes. Trump isn't likely to roll over and surrender everything to Russian demands, and there will have to be some sort of give and take. But I do believe that there's a potential for a deal between Russia and the United States, and part of that deal will be the termination of this state of war that exists between Russia and the United States, a state of war imposed by the United States by seeking the strategic defeat of Russia. That will have to be terminated as a policy objective by the United States if there's going to be any chance of peace.
Lass uns über das Schicksal der Ukraine sprechen. Wie wird sich der Ukraine-Krieg im kommenden Jahr weiterentwickeln? Aktuell scheinen die russischen Streitkräfte große Geländegewinne im Donbass zu erzielen. Jüngst sprachen der russische Präsident Wladimir Putin und der stellvertretende Vorsitzende des russischen Sicherheitsrats, Dmitri Medwedew, auf dem Parteitag der Regierungspartei Einiges Russland davon, noch mehr Regionen in die große russische Familie aufzunehmen. Wird die Ukraine noch weitere Gebiete an Russland abtreten müssen? Werden letztlich auch Kharkov und Odessa an Russland übergehen?
First of all, Ukraine's not ceding any territories, Russia's taking them. It's a little bit different mindset. I think Russia's putting a marker on the table for the United States, letting Donald Trump know that Russia is not going to accept a deal that doesn't give Russia everything that it wants from this conflict. And that, if the West and Ukraine want to continue this conflict, then Russia will do so to the detriment of Ukrainian territorial integrity. And that means that I think Donald Trump's going to have one shot at brokering an agreement. And if it fails, and it likely will, because I don't believe Trump understands the extent to which there is no room for negotiation on the part of Russia. And I don't think Trump understands the reality of the lack of legitimacy that the Ukrainian government brings to the table when it comes to conflict termination. And if that's the case, then look, we're looking at the absolute collapse of Ukraine's ability to defend itself. Their military has reached the point of exhaustion. I think we're going to see rapidly the Russians asserting control not only of the territory of the Donbass, but also Zaporizhia and Kherson. And there's not as though there's a huge Ukrainian army waiting to rise up to block further progress. If there's no Ukrainian military, if the Ukrainian military has collapsed, then you're probably looking at Russia making dramatic moves in the Kharkov region, perhaps even Sumy. Remember, it's from Sumy that the invasion of Kursk took place. So Sumy may very well pay a price as well. And of course, Odessa. And if you're taking Odessa, then Mykolaiv. And if you're taking Mykolaiv, then Dnipropetrovsk. All of these regions come into play. Russia hasn't formally committed to this, but this is, I think, a signal being sent to the United States that if Trump starts to play games with negotiations, Russia's not in the mood to play games. They didn't lose as many men as they lost just to give it away at a negotiating table to an American buffoon who thinks just because he won the majority of a vote in America, he's suddenly relevant on this global stage. Trump has a lot of words, but at the end of the day, the United States that backs his words is still the failed enterprise that is part of a collapsing NATO. They got defeated in Afghanistan and is currently struggling to find out what they're going to do with China in the Middle East. And so to suddenly believe that the United States comes to the table with Russia, which has fought a 2.5-year conflict against the collective West, and can push Russia around is ludicrous.
Auch in Deutschland steht eine richtungsweisende Bundestagswahl an. Nach über 3 Jahren unter Bundeskanzler Olaf Scholz, der die deutsche Politik völlig unter die US-Interessen subsumiert hat, gärt es in der deutschen Bevölkerung. Vor allem die AfD artikuliert den Wunsch nach deutscher Souveränität. Raus aus der EU, aus dem Euro und womöglich auch aus der NATO. Aktuelle Hochrechnungen gehen allerdings davon aus, dass die einzig tragbare Bundesregierung von der CDU und ihrem Kanzlerkandidaten Friedrich Merz angeführt werden würde. Merz war Aufsichtsratsvorsitzender des US-Monopolisten BlackRock und gilt als Hardliner in Sachen Ukraine-Politik. Vor kurzem versicherte er bei seinem Besuch in Kiew, unter ihm als Kanzler werde Deutschland den Taurus-Marschflugkörper an die Ukraine liefern. Wie siehst du die aktuelle Entwicklung in Deutschland? Wohin wird die anstehende Bundestagswahl Deutschland führen?
Well, I don't know if the AFU has the ability to win a majority vote. They are on the ascendancy. They're a power that has to be reckoned with. But odds are that it will be a government led by this Merz character. That's okay. Germany's a failed nation. It's a failing state, simply putting one loser in place of another loser. He embraces policies that have failed. And what he thinks the Taurus missile is going to, there may not be a Ukraine by the time there's an election in Germany. The guy's a joke. He'll get elected. If he gets elected, his government will fail by the summer, and then we'll be looking at additional elections in Germany. I think right now the trajectory is for the alternative for Germany, Deutschland, and down the road, that will be the government of Germany, and Germany will, begin the process of removing itself from the European Union, from NATO, these failed institutions, and that will trigger a similar flight by other nations. And I think this is the decade that we see the end of NATO and the European Union. And Germany will take the lead in making that happen. But this character, this Merz character, I mean, he's a joke. I mean, do the German people, look at all the things that are going on in Germany. And the one issue that you brought up, and I'm not being critical of you, is he's going to provide Taurus missiles to Ukraine. Ask the German voter if they really give a rat's you-know-what about Taurus missiles going to Ukraine, is that going to put food on the table? Is that going to lower electricity bills? Is that going to bring industrialization back? Is this really what the German people are thinking? I mean, come on, man. Germany, take care of the problem. And the problem is him, Merz. It'll just be continuation of the same failed policies that you have. But hey, Germany's Germany. Good luck.
Du sagtest vorhin, dass du für das Jahr 2025 nicht viel Gutes erwartest. Vielleicht kannst du unseren Zuhörern eine Art Lichtblick geben. Gibt es irgendwelche Entwicklungen, die dir Hoffnung auf eine bessere Zukunft machen? Siehst du den Aufstieg der multipolaren Welt im kommenden Jahr oder den Jahren danach? Was ist mit der Entwicklung der BRICS? Wie sieht es mit der Befreiung Afrikas aus?
Well, there's no doubt that the world is transitioning towards a multipolar format. I think the election of Donald Trump, however, is going to provide some, significant pushback. He is an American firster. That means that America will not take a first doesn't mean tie. People need to understand that. So when you say America first, it means America wins. And that's Donald Trump's posture, and that's the posture. Now, that doesn't mean militarized. I think there's a lot of there's a big push within the Trump camp to avoid conflict. But when you have a policy of peace through strength and you get pushback, because peace through strength just means that we intimidate you until you do what we want, or else we'll beat you up. So, Russia's not going to yield to the United States at all. Zero yield. And we'll have to see how that works. China, I think Trump has a very unrealistic appraisal for China. Trump hasn't had to deal with Africa and the transitions that are taking place right now. It'll be interesting to see how he responds to that. I think this will be a very decisive year for Europe. If Germany leads the way, the sooner Germany can redefine itself, the better. The longer Germany goes through this agony of trying to be part of a failed institution called the European Union and trying to prop up a failed alliance called NATO, the worse it will get for Germany. The sooner Germany understands it should be operate as an independent nation that looks out for German interests first and foremost, and that those interests may not align with the United States, the better. So this will be a very interesting year for Germany. But unfortunately, it's hard to see. In order to make 2025 look good, I think we're going to have to pull out and say what things are going to look like in 2030, and understand that 2025 is part of that journey to 2030. I think by 2030, the European Union and NATO will be gone, and Europe will be looking, at redefining itself, which is always useful. It'll be difficult redefinition, but again, the day Germans start looking out for Germans will be a good day. The day that the French people start looking out for France, it'll be a good day. To have proud people like the Germans and the French forgetting who they are and subordinating themselves to this mythical creature called the European Union has just led to where you are today. This collapse of what Germany once was. So we're in a world in transition, and Europe is transitioning too, and it's going to be difficult. 2025 is not going to be a pretty year for anybody. But if you understand that it's sort of a necessary struggle that has to take place to get to where hopefully things will be better, then we just have to survive.
Liebe Zuschauer, wenn euch unsere Beiträge gefallen, teilt sie unbedingt in den sozialen Medien. Abonniert unseren Kanal und drückt auf die Glocke, damit ihr keine Veröffentlichung von Gegenpol verpasst.